Hi everyone, covering this story today, which is actually from 10th of March 2011, and I'm highlighting this story because it does actually mirror the Hampstead case that was reported by two children and their mother in 2014 to Central London Police. Now, there's quite a few similarities between this cult that's described as a satanic cult that was operating in Wales, and it was the crimes were perpetrated by members of what's described as a coven of child abusers who claimed to worship Satan, and it was him and three of his female accomplices who were all arrested. That apparently they called him Lord. And they had they'd moved from North London to this area in Wales, which was Kidwelly, near Carmarthen. And they'd all bought houses opposite or next door to each other in this community. And they'd been abusing children for over a decade, really. Now, right at the very start here, we're told that social services were alerted to Batley's child abuse in 2002 and took no action. Okay, he was found guilty of 35 sex offences against children and young adults, probably a lot more than that. Now, to start with, I'm just going to highlight the similarities here between what the Hampstead children were saying, Hampstead children who knew nothing about this man in this case, and as terrible as the crimes are that these people have committed, you know, it is in some respects a watered down version of the horrors that the Hampstead children were describing, because their descriptions included trafficked babies and killing and even eating those trafficked babies. And I think when you've got a 9-year-old child being questioned about that by police, and the police mentions the bones, and the child immediately says, oh no, the bones, no, they didn't throw the bones away, they used to make things out of them. Some people from Swiss Cottage, you know, there was a man in Swiss Cottage, he used to make carvings out of the bones, you know, they make churches and, you know, and we've been told that apparently her vegan nutritionist yoga teacher mother, who doesn't even drink, okay, had coached her to say that, her and her brother, they apparently had coached her to say that in order to stop the dad from having access, you see. Now, since we haven't got any other case in the whole of criminal history where a mother has forced a child to talk about a satanic cult and murdering and eating trafficked babies, okay, we haven't got any examples of that, but we have here got an example, and this isn't the only one by any means, most of them are covered up. Here we've got an example of the crimes that the children were talking about. Okay, now first of all, sect members were given matching tattoos of the Eye of Horus, the Egyptian falcon god. Well, the Hampstead children described the same thing, that all the cult members had tattoos. Most of them, the tattoos were on the genitals. Also, they were all living close by in one community. They were abusing multiple children. Okay. They all lived in houses next to or opposite each other. One girl, well, there were two victims that had had babies as a result of the abuse. One girl was initiated when she was just 11 and threatened with death by the cult assassins if she did not comply. At least 2 of his young victims gave birth as a result of the systematic and prolonged abuse. Well, how does a child give birth to a baby without anybody investigating how that child was impregnated in the first place? And again, we've got another similarity, because both children describe how their father, who was apparently ahead of this cult, allegedly, he'd threatened them with death if ever they broke their deal of silence. Okay, and it goes on to describe the whole horrible thing, you know. Batley claimed that he moved to Wales for health reasons to escape the smog, a claim rather undermined by the fact that his coven also relocated to the Principality. Police believe there was another reason for the exodus. They suspect that members of the cult who have not been identified were based in Wales. So, you know, we know that these 4 that have been arrested are the tip of an iceberg that will involve social services and police. And, you know, what's happened is it's come out. This time it can't be covered up. People involved are probably not the type of people that can be easily blackmailed or bribed away or threatened. So they've gone for damage limitation, and they've picked out, you know, 4 key members. None of them really professional people, apart from this person was a dental nurse. And they're the 4 guys for this. They were all involved, but these are the ones that are going to take the rap now. Okay? But we know that there's a lot more involved than these. And, you know, they were earning a lot of money out of it all as well. You know, every time Millar entertained a client, she would send Batley a text message to tell him how much she had been paid. She had sex with more than 3,000 clients over a 2-year period, making about £2,000 a month, a quarter of which went to him. It explained how Batley, officially unemployed, could afford a £45,000 caravan and frequent holidays abroad. Goodness knows what he was doing abroad. And again, that's a similarity with the children's dad, who was apparently an actor, but he was mostly unemployed. And yet, he was living quite you know, an expensive kind of a lifestyle. And again, you know, we've got evidence to suggest that he was tipped off. Well, the police reckon that he was tipped off. You know, I'm just looking for that part here, which is somewhere around here. Finally, last year, one of Batley's victims went to the police. It was one of the girls he had impregnated as a teenager. She said she feared he might target her own child. So this girl, she's gone as an adult. Batley was tipped off about the police inquiry. He was ticked off. By the time he was arrested, had destroyed potential evidence. But officers found homemade films of 2 of his victims on a camcorder. Interviewed 11 times by detectives, he steadfastly maintained his innocence, but a jury did not believe him. So, you know, they've got him because he still had films in one of his camcorders from his more recent victims. Now, the Children's Commission have recently come out and explained that for every child that's identified as being sexually abused, there's probably another 7 that remain unidentified. And that's been accepted as an officially, professionally recorded, established fact now. Only 1 in 8 children get identified by professionals. So therefore, for every child that they've found, that they've discovered, every child victim, police and social services have to operate on the understanding that there's probably another 7 that have yet to be identified. And it's very important that the child victims are identified, because otherwise it means that those children are left damaged, and they will be damaged in adulthood. You know, even if they get over the abuse and they move on with their lives, at some key moment in their life, usually a birth of a child, or going through marriage or problems, suddenly these memories will resurface, and it does destroy lives. It happened to me in my late 20s, suddenly flashbacks, having to relive the horror. It totally disrupted my life. I had to take a year out of my studies at Polytechnic. Another friend of mine went through exactly the same thing. She had to take nearly a year off work on sick leave after remembered being abused by her grandfather, who it turned out had abused her other members of her family, her aunties and some of her cousins, you know. So it really destroys lives, and it's the same effect. You know, if a child got knocked down in the street and they were just left there, nobody bothered about them, people would be absolutely outraged. But that is what is happening with children who are being sexually abused. It is similar effect in the damages, the long-term damages, if it's left untreated especially. It is the same as being knocked down by a car. It's just that these children have been knocked down by a sadistic, insane belief system, thought system, you know. And again, we found connections between the Hampstead crew, the alleged suspects, that they were operating from Aleister Crowley's book of the law that he supposedly wrote while in contact with the spirit Horus, an Egyptian god who calls himself the priest of princes. And he wrote a book of the law which basically says, do as thy will. So, you know, if you can do for your pleasure and you can get away with it, that makes Satan happy. So, and what it basically means is that those who've got the most power to do as thy wilt will do that, and the people who haven't got power to stop those people enjoying themselves, they'll be the victims, and that's perfectly all right according to the book of the law. You know, it doesn't matter what your victims think or feel, as long as you, the perpetrator, are achieving your ecstasy, because that's what life's about. Apparently it's in pursuit of ecstasy. And you know, you look at this guy, he really does look horrible, and he does look like a monster. And, you know, any parent, if you could imagine somebody like him getting his hands on your child. But the thing is that most of the child abusers do not look like him. They look like normal, respectable people, a lot of them. You know, slap a suit on them, slap a label like Kafkas officer or social worker or police detective or solicitor, you know, estate agent. And they're not just involved in child abuse, they are involved in drugs as well, you know, and children in these type of that get drawn into these child abuse rings, because that's what it is. And the satanic aspect of it, whether they believe in it or not, really it's just a cover, it's a backdrop, and they do know that children talking about satanic abuse are rarely believed. They're rarely believed. So we've got quite a few similarities here between the Hampstead case and this case, and this was in 2011. So therefore, that increases the validity of what the Hampstead children relate to us. And, you know, I've said that these people really, they need to be in gated communities, locked up in a gated community, let them have their own currency, jobs, whatever, but they all stay in that community. I think also we need centres for people who haven't actually committed any crimes against children, but who are burdened with desires to have sex with children or harm children, that there should be a place for them to go and report that to and get immediate help, and there should be no association. You know, that should not be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem or a crime or anything against an individual to admit that they've got a problem and they need help. In fact, they need commending, because they're taking steps to prevent themselves from committing a crime, and you know, that is a commendable thing, and we need to provide that facility because it's obviously a serious problem. It's a psychosexual disease, and when people get infected with it, through whichever way, you know, and again, we need to dispel this myth that every abuser has been abused as a child. That is not true. Some of them have, but the vast majority of children who survive child abuse in adulthood, they do try to be better parents, but a lot of them just put it out of their minds, you know, and they won't ever come forward because they're too embarrassed, they're too burdened with the shame and guilt that society's dumped on this issue, you know, and they buried it under shame and guilt, and a lot of children that were victims end up as drug addicts, and often drugs are involved in child abuse. They're plied with drugs, and they do become drug addicts, you know, and in adulthood a lot of them end up being imprisoned because of drugs-related crimes. And, you know, the Hampstead children talk about the little boy of 8 describes in great detail about the white powder that his father gave him, that he kept in special little bags, and how he sniffed it. He used to put it on his hand and he had to sniff it, and he described how it made him feel. Now, the children's hair was tested for drugs, and the results of those tests, the forensic results, have gone missing. And both the children, you know, report being repeatedly anally raped by plastic and real willies, and a top medical expert with 30 years in her field of child sexual abuse was invited to examine the children, you know, and she found extensive anal scarring in both children and signs of RAD. Now, when that went to court, the judge, Justice Porthley, threw it out of court. She said that she was an over-dogmatic expert, and the judge chose to uphold instead the suggestion from a Barnet police officer, a Barnet police medic, who suggested the possibility that anal scarring in 2 child witnesses reporting the same anal abuse might have been caused by a very large poo. Very large solid poo, is what he said. And Justice Porthley described that as a peer review. And, you know, that, again, it was an outright lie, because you cannot compare a Barnet police officer medic to somebody like Dr. Deborah Hodes, who's an expert in child sexual abuse with 30 years experience under her belt. And yet, you know, her findings were overridden by a Barnet police officer medic. The judge decided to uphold him. So why did they bring in Dr. Deborah Hodes to examine the children then? Why didn't they just leave the police medic to examine them? And, you know, and that's the thing, you see, because not everybody involved in the police, most of them aren't complicit in child abuse, and they do try to do the right thing. And it was one such person who'd obviously called in Dr. Deborah Hodes. If one of the complicits had been around, then probably Dr. Deborah Hose wouldn't have been called in. But she was, and then she had to be dismissed, which they did that through the Barnet police medic, you see. Now, the other thing is that, you know, when children reporting sexual abuse have to undergo medical examinations to make sure, you know, to see if they can confirm the abuse. Often it isn't. Medical evidence doesn't confirm abuse either way. But in the Hampstead children case, it did, you know. But if children have to go through that, then is it too much to ask suspects to show their genitals when children have described them as having birthmarks, tattoos, red dots, you know, red dot, Mr. Hollins has red dots all over his willy, piercings. But apparently, no, it was too much to ask 70 plus witnesses, including teachers, social workers, CAFCAS officers, you know, police officers from Haringey police. It was too much to ask them, to expect them on the strength of 2 child witness, detailed testimony and medical evidence. It was too much to ask those people just to show the police their genitals, to show that, look, I haven't got any tattoos. It would have been a simple matter, case closed, nobody would have even heard about it. But no, that was too much. Those people had to be protected from that kind of police investigation. But meanwhile, 2 child witnesses reporting the abuse, they have to be anally examined by 2 different doctors. They get taken off their mother permanently, never given back. And then, you know, not long after they've been taken off the mother, suddenly they're giving partial retractions. And they are only partial retractions. And, you know, watch the retraction interviews. They're online, they're on YouTube. You can see them. Somebody's leaked them, obviously from the police. They've been leaked online. And so, you know, there's clear coercion going on there. There's veiled threats, obvious veiled threats. And the police interviewer, right from the start, admits in both interviews with each child that he's been and collected that child from the children's home, and they discussed the retraction interview on the way to the police station in the car. I mean, that is how low this gets, you see. And then we've got, like I say here, again, we've got the same similarity. Social services knew, they were alerted, but they took no action. And, you know, I'm just going to play a little section from this. This is from a police sergeant, a police detective sergeant who is a whistleblower, John, and he's spoken out. And this isn't a hoax, this is for real. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody at UK Column, and especially Brian Gerrish as well. Full respect to all of you, because, you know, they have had the courage to face this. They really have. They faced it when everybody else in the alternative news networks have been poo-pooing it or sensationalising certain aspects of the case. These people have stayed solid, they've stayed grounded, they've addressed it absolutely full on, and I absolutely appreciate and commend them very, very highly for doing that. And obviously as well to the brave people like Melanie Shaw and this man and so many other people who've come forward. Victoria Ash has spoken as well last year. Really, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your courage, your bravery, your strength to talk about this and bring it out into the open, because it is a very, very serious problem. And you're going to listen to this extract now, and you're going to hear exactly how serious it is, and how long it has been going on. That is the other thing we have to understand. It's been going on for a very long time, and these people, you know, it isn't just a minority now. It's infected into everything, and you know, as I say, with the Hampstead case, they had a fact finding. Even the High Court now is implicated because they threw the case out. Basically, they said there was no case to investigate, and found the only suspect that attended that court hearing, supposedly a fact-find hearing, the father, who was allegedly to have abused his children, prostituted his children, and killed and ate babies regularly, trafficked babies. He was found completely innocent on nothing more than his word. He was never arrested by police. He was only questioned, never had so much of his mobile phone looked at, and yet he was found completely innocent, and the children's claims were dismissed as a fantasy, and the very shoddy and only partial retractions were upheld as more solid evidence than the actual allegations that were repeated as well to foster carers after the retractions were made. So, you know, the retractions were actually later retracted according to foster carer testimony and the mother's testimony as well. But still, the judge decided to uphold the retractions, and she upheld Barnet Police medic's opinion that it was the anal scarring was caused by a very large solid poo. Now, this Detective John, he's going to mention now about Haringey Council, and I just want to explain here as well that this is relevant to the Hampstead case, because the Hampstead children reported police officers from Haringey being involved in this special culture, as the children initially described it. And when the children were taken off the mother and placed into foster care, and they'd repeated their original allegations to foster carers, the mother did, before this went public, her case went public, she did go to the courts and request a judicial review, asking for the case to be reopened and properly investigated. And the judge, again, Justice Porfley, refused the judicial review. But at that review, a barrister representing Haringey Council stood up and requested that all the evidence related to the children's case, the Hampstead children's case, be destroyed. Okay, that was a barrister from representing Haringey Council requested at the judicial review for all the evidence to be destroyed. Now, John is going to describe what was going on in Haringey Council when he was working there.
If you ain't there, one of my kids was a little bit behind with things, and I used to tell this bloke, he said, they'll go for him straight away. They will get it. Don't ever lay in bed thinking they won't get it. They will get it, and by get it, you know what I mean. And
right. So what happens now then? So you've been threatened.
What happens now is I say I can't work under you, so I leave, and I go onto a child abuse unit, and I end up in North London, a very busy part of North London, and I start on this unit, and they're investigating child abuse, and I'm in there, and I get approached by a detective sergeant and said, look, as well as being an investigator, do you want to take on an additional role? I said, well, like what? They said, well, there's all sorts of things you can do. I said, is there one to do with a liaison with children's homes? I went, yeah, there is. The girl left 2 years ago. I said, was there any issues with it? And she said, no issues. It's an easy number. You'll get given a day here and there to go and deal with it. There'll be the odd meeting, but over 2 years, she never had any issues at all. I said, did child prostitution ever crop up? Oh, no, we don't get any of that. And okay, this was the London borough of Haringey. Now, Haringey has the most amount of kids home of any sort of local authority in the country. I think it was about 22 to 26 care homes for a small London borough. Anyway, so I was given assurances that it wasn't a problem. So I picked up the phone and I asked for a list of all the care homes from social services. So they faxed it through because the police didn't have a copy of it. It come through and it had the phone numbers, and I rang them up first, and I said, "This is so and so care home." Went, yeah. I said, I told them who I was. I said, nothing to worry about, but this is what I'm looking into. But went, oh right. I said, how many children you got in? I said, about 5. So how many do you lose at a weekend to crime? And I'm on about prostitution and things like that. He went, oh, 3. I went, you what? I said, what? He said, yeah, they usually go missing on a Thursday and come back on a Monday. I said, do you think they're involved in prostitution? Oh, well, no, we know they are. I went, right, well, has the police ever been to speak to you about it? He went, no, the police come and pick up the missing persons form, but the kids come back. I said, well, what are the kids like? She said, oh, they're in the right state, some of them are bleeding, some of them are so high on drugs, we know that come Wednesday they're going to be kicking off because they've not had their drugs. They've all got money on them, you know, and I said, oh my God, so that was like real time. So all of a sudden, I've got 3 kids within 6 minutes. By the end of 3 days, I'd found 50 children. 50 children. So I held a strategy meeting and I brought in the social services. I brought in...
this is Haringey Social...
Haringey Social Services. I think Hackney might have turned up, neighbouring boroughs, you know. And then, because you get an overspill sometimes. I had a representative for who dealt with child trafficking for Barnardos. I had connections, a lot of these youth NGO groups came. There was a lot of people there. And I laid out my plan, and I worked out a formula of how to deal with it using a simple act on the Children's Act and a section of the Children's Act relating to taking a child out of care at an unreasonable hour. And I'd done my research, and I was just attacked, firstly by a head of social services who started screaming at me saying, what have you done to us? There's 50 care plans we've now got to implement because of you. I said, but you must have known about these kids. I went, yeah, but they didn't come to notice, so we weren't bothered. I said, well, they're making money, they're, you know. And he said, well, we've got so much work to do. You've created an absolute nightmare for us. You're a headache. So that was made clear that I wouldn't get much help from them. And then Barnardo's, the woman in charge of that unit for Barnardo's, she then turned around and said, you're treading on toes. You know for a fact that a child will never betray their pimp. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you'll never prove it because the kids won't, you know, that's their source of money. I said, well, I know that. That's why I'm going on this other statute law that will give me a power to search and seize property and everything. And he said, well, you can't just do that. There's a protocol here. There is an officer, senior officer, who I'll be reporting you to because they're already dealing with it. I went, well, who's that? So he mentioned this name.
By senior officer, she meant a senior police officer.
Senior police officer, yeah, who wasn't Vice. Now, Vice had governance for that. This was some other man. And he said, there is an operation running. I said, well, I need to talk to this man. And she placed 20 actions on me to complete before I did any work. And each action could take me days.
Sorry, who placed those actions on you?
This was Barnardo's, this because it was a partnership working. When you deal with children, it's all working together, you know. And I was absolutely flabbergasted what was going on. And so I spoke to my inspector, and he said, well, just crack on. Don't worry about it, crack on and do what you've got to do. So the next day I went out and I got a result straight away. I got a girl that was being pimped out, and I got a pimp, and it worked. So then I get a call from this high-ranking officer who's the chief superintendent. So I have to go up to one of the police buildings, and he said, just tread on toes, you can get it back off. We've got an officer dealing with this. I said, well, dealing with what? Prostitution of children in care homes for London. We've got it under wraps. And I said, well, who is it? So he gave me the name of this girl, and I called her. And she said, it's a load of crap. She said, I've been to a meeting, but I've never dealt with any victims, and how can I nick? She said, it's just me. I don't even know where these kids' homes are. I've not even visited one. I said, so you're not investigating? She said, no, how can I? So it was a load of lies. So that was shut down, right? Then, lo and behold, I moved. And then I get a call that the girl that was at the Zoe, the young girl that was at the centre of the other operation, was found dead on the street in a suspicious overdose. Just found dumped in the street dead.
How old? Just remind us.
By this time, I think she was getting on for 15, 16, something around that area, you know. A year or so had passed.
So 15-year-old girls just found dead.
Key witness to this case, dumped on the street. And then it just absolutely, it destroyed me, you know. And
so there you have it, straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, you know. And as I say, this isn't a hoax. Brian Gerrish is not a stupid man. You know, UK Column, they are a really respectable organisation, in the sense they really try to give real stories from the real life of what's happening in Britain. And you know, if he says this man is a police detective sergeant and he's giving his interview, then that is a fact. I take it as a fact. This isn't hearsay. This is from a police officer. I'll leave you the link. I really ask you to listen to it. You know, please listen to it, because what he describes, John, the detective sergeant, what he describes as was happening in central London, again, it sets the whole background of that Hampstead case. It adds further validity again, because again we've got absolute ignorance of, and these are cared for children who've been removed from their family homes because they're at risk, all being forced to take part in a massive child prostitution ring. And one of the victims that does come forward and agree to talk about her pimp is suddenly found dead of a drug overdose on the street. You know, nearly 15 years old. How long had that child been in care? How long has she been prostituted out? And what does that death say to all the other children, the other child victims? And the sad fact is that I bet a lot of those victims now are actually in prison or dead themselves from drug-related crimes and drug abuse, because, you know, they do use drugs. And that's a whole part of the whole scene. You know, police do have easy access to drugs because they confiscate a lot, but we know that they're involved in illegally dealing in drugs as well. And, you know, I really feel for John and his fellow police officers, because most of them, you know, when you listen to him, you know that the majority of them really, really are there. They want to solve crimes. They want to stop this abuse of children, and they get thwarted. And it's always from senior management, and especially from social services. And when you think the social services are removing children from family homes on the grounds of a future emotional risk and putting them in a children's home, and they're turning a blind eye to the fact that those children are being sexually abused while they're in care, and a child can end up dead on the street while they're in care because they're a key witness in a child prostitution ring involving 50 children that he managed to identify in the space of a few days. So again, if we go on the Children's Commission report, which again, I say, has been officially accepted, so how many times 50 by 7? That's how many children were likely to be involved in that child prostitution ring, because for everyone identified, there's another 8 out there. There's 8 children. Only 1 out of 8 gets identified. That's, you know, I can't stress it enough how serious it is what we're doing, what's happening to the next generation. If we don't stop this, if we don't start, you know, coming to terms with it and addressing it like adults instead of like idiots, and, you know, sensationalising stuff, we've just got to face the sober reality of it, that we've got to attack it from, we've got to address it from every angle, from an educational angle, You know, what are we teaching children at schools? Why are children growing up alienated from children and knowing nothing at all about child's needs? Why are boys leaving school, you know, teenagers, without knowing anything at all about pregnancy, a pregnant woman's needs? Is that man likely to be a father in his lifetime? Probably yes. Is he therefore going to have to deal with a pregnant woman? Yes. Is he going to have to deal with a newborn baby and a toddler and a 5-year-old, 7, 8, 9-year-old teenager? Yes. So why has he received no education? But instead, you know, we're brought up to trivialise things. And, you know, this has been trivialised, like I say, just by being put in the Mail online, that all these type of stories, considered sordid, are only fit for the gutter press. You know, the Guardian don't cover this, do they? It's for the gutter press, and it's like that's where the child victims belong now as well, in the gutter press. But they don't. The child victims, they're innocent, and they do not belong in the gutter press. This should have been on the BBC. The BBC should have been covering this. People should have been asking questions. Well, why didn't social services do anything when they found out? How did he manage to get tipped off? And again, that's related to the Hampstead case, because we know that the Hampstead children's father, was tipped off, and he even admits that on BBC TV in their interview. And again, the very fact that the BBC got involved to give that man an interview when he's still a lawful suspect, and he still is, because now the IPCC and the IICSA and the NSPCC have upheld the mother and public concerns about the lack of justice. And that is what my stance has been right from the start, the lack of justice for children. Because if you don't have a strong system of child protection directives in place, then you're never ever going to catch anybody. You're just going to get the odd few like him. But you know, as the UN said, arrest rates for crimes against children, serious crimes against children in Britain, are extremely low. And, you know, my other video, I've explained the loopholes. I've gone into detail. And when you think that hundreds and thousands of children are slipping through them loopholes every single day, you've got to close them up. You've got to close them up, because it's like saying to a parent whose child has gone missing and then later turns up dead that, well, I'm sorry, no, we can't be bothered to report your case or your story, because, you know, it's just a triviality. It's just what's going to happen every year. A kid's going to go missing and get killed. You know, we don't cover those news stories anymore, love, because it's just a waste of time. We just accept that's what's going to happen. But that's what we're saying with our present child protection system. We're saying that it can all be just left to the discretion of local authorities, and no other outside authority has got any right to come in and scrutinise or question what those local authorities are doing. So an employer like John, Detective Sergeant John, speaking here on UK Column, you know, and he's in fear of his life, this man. He's been threatened, his family's been threatened, he's been harassed. But, you know, God bless him, he's come out and spoke, you know. And a lot of people like him have. Carol Woods, another brave, courageous lady who stood up and, you know, questioned. She was a social worker, and she questioned what happened to her. She lost her home, she got sectioned. You know, other people that have come forward, you know, they invent charges against them. There's all kinds of things that have been going on, and it means that British adults are being abused. It's not just children. The adult population is being abused because they're working in these arenas. They're being threatened. They work in fear. They go home with a heavy conscience. They don't sleep well at night. You know, it's the whole arena of it is bringing us down on such a deep level, and it's all just covered up. Nobody talks about it, you know. And as I say, UK Colin's talking about it, and you know, I do ask you to support UK Colin in any way that you can. I know a lot of people haven't got much money these days, but if you can afford to, you know, support them financially, do. But if you can afford to share some of their news reports, they do daily news reports. If you can share some of them on your Facebook, on your Twitter, you know, because these people are giving us the news. They're giving us the news. The BBC aren't. The BBC aren't giving us the news. You know, with the BBC we get a lawfully suspected child abuser, because as I say, the IPCC, IICSA and the NSPCC have upheld our concerns about a lack of justice for the children in this case after the High Court judgment decided it was all a fantasy and the father was completely innocent. Okay, after that. So, you know, that then begs the question, well, why didn't the judge, a High Court judge, why didn't she ask all the questions that the IPCC are asking, that the IICSA are asking, that the NSPCC are asking, that the mother was asking all the way from the start, and or her supporters are asking? And the questions like this police officer has been asking, for how long, what this poor man has had to live with. My heart goes out to him and his family, and to all the people that are working under duress like that. And, you know, the situation is that bad that the NSPCC and Ofsted and a lot of other organisations have had to set up whistleblower helplines, because that's how oppressed these people are, you know. And I will say one thing. I've noticed that there's so much massive public support in Britain at the moment for Jeremy Corbyn, and there's been crowds of people out on the streets wherever he's gone. His meetings have been absolutely packed, you know. And I really don't hold with this hero worship for politicians. I think a politician is as good as the people that they're supporting and what's important to those people. And so, you know, although I am aware that Jeremy Corbyn just does not seem to be fully aware of how serious this issue is, and, you know, I think it's John Mann MP has criticised him because of his ignorance of what was going on in children's homes at Islington Council when he was MP for Islington, and there should have been an inquiry, but there wasn't. You know, I do feel that was probably just because he just wasn't aware really of how serious the problem is, you know. But it is a fact, you know, he hasn't spoken out about this, and the people who are supporting him, the big crowds, I hear people saying they want jobs, they want housing, they want this, they want that. But I don't hear anybody talking about children's rights, demanding children's rights. And because, let's face it, if we lived in a country that cared about children, then we wouldn't be having austerity, would we? Parents wouldn't be forced to work on 0-hour contracts. Parents would be getting more quality time with the children. You see, these things, people ignore, trivialise the issue of children. We, as I've said over and over again, we're under the spell of that word minor in relation to a child. You know, we're all under that spell. The child is not a minor issue. The child is not a minor concern. It's a very important concern, a very important issue, because the children are our future, and without them, we've got nothing. There is no future if we don't have children. One generation will be wiped out. And what we make of our humanity is what we put into our children, and they need to come first. And I asked the people who were supporting Jeremy Corbyn, talk about this issue, raise it, put the children first. No, we want the children first. We are not going to live with austerity, because it's going to affect children. And there will be jobs. When you start addressing children's needs, there's jobs there. There's lots of jobs for people. Because children need adults to work on their behalf. And as I said, in my report, we've got to change the whole education system. Because children we're not educating, they're not being educated, obviously. So I'll leave you the link to Brian Gerrish. I'll leave you the link to this. You can read through the whole horrible details of it all. But this is the kind of thing that has been happening in Britain, and the Book of the Law is out there. Alistair Crowley's Book of the Law. It is on YouTube. People are following that. And it does involve professionals. It involves police and people working in children's homes. And I think we need to have some kind of amnesty, because there are people who were forced to be complicit against their will. And we need an amnesty for those people to come forward. And we've really got to clean our society up. And we're not going to do it until we start giving, the onus of proof really has to start being on the suspects. It really does. When you've got medical evidence, you've got multiple child witnesses and multiple children named who are at risk, then, you do have to go and say, look, I'm sorry, these two children, they've made these allegations against you. We know you're a head teacher of a school and how embarrassing this is for you, but they've made these allegations. Medical evidence supports their allegations, so I'm afraid that we do have to ask you to come with us to the police station, and a medical officer will examine your genitals, because they've been described to us. It's been told to us that you have a birthmark in that region. Because when a child, as I say, the child witness themselves have had to be submitted to a sex examination, a sexual examination on giving the allegations, then the very least is, if they've given descriptions of an abuser's private parts, then that abuser needs to be looked at, whether or not medical evidence confirms it, because medical evidence doesn't always. Children aren't always penetrated. But if they've described an abuser's genitals, that is an exact description. Go and have a look. And it's that upsets us. It's that. And again, the people who've been included among the suspects who protest their innocence, well, don't just protest it, go and prove it. Just go to the police station and prove it. Is that too much to ask to do when the child that has issued that allegation themselves have had to go through, examinations by 2 different police officers, by multiple medics? And it's that the emphasis is all on You know, and that's what the BBC did when they interviewed the father, Ricky Dearman, who admitted on BBC TV that he'd been tipped off by his social worker. The police, instead of going straight to him and arresting him as they should have done, because arrest criteria was fully satisfied, instead they contacted his social worker, and then his social worker phoned him up and told him police wanted to speak to him. And he was spoken to, he was questioned, he was told, you're not under arrest, you're free to leave at any time. And he wasn't even questioned about any of the allegations apart from an incident in a swimming bath. And if that's the level of justice in this country for children, and people can complain about austerity and complain about this and that, you know, all the reasons why we're in this mess in the first place, whereby a criminal banking system's controlling our government and our country and most of the world. The very fact we're in that situation is because our children have got no rights, and these people are sadistic abusers. They are sadists. You know, the higher up the top you go, the more delicacies people want and power to buy with their money. And if that's, you know, having power over a group of children to have fun with, because Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law tells you to do as thy will, we have to accept it's out there. It's real. It's not a fantasy, you know. And again, as I say, UK column, absolutely top. I really appreciate everything that they've done, and my heart and love goes out to all the people that have had to deal with this head on, face on, who've had the courage, even just to stay alive. You know, stay alive. I know how hard it is. I really do. But stay alive, because you're worth it. Your life is important, and your experiences, you know, we together will be strong, and we will end this. We will do whatever we can to end it, and that is what we have to do. And we have to be, I suppose, ruthless in our investigation. I don't mean ruthless as in, you know, attacking suspects. I really disagree with that kind of attitude. I don't think it helps anybody. I think we have to behave lawfully and responsibly and sanely, because the opposite of that is what the victims have suffered, is lawlessness, inhumanity. We need to find strength in our humanity, in our compassion, in our sanity, in our love of living lawfully within the framework of a humane law. You know, a law that delivers proper established child protection directives. And the UN have listed them, and the EU, you know, I've shared them before on previous videos, but according to EU child protection directives, really the Hampstead case, every single police officer, social worker, family court judge, high court judge involved in that would have been up on charges for criminal negligence. So don't forget that. And I'll leave you the links below. And thank you very, very much for listening, and, you know, taking a bit of time out on behalf of the children. And please talk about this to everybody. You know, share the information, share the solutions. It is positive to address a problem and to try to do whatever we can to resolve that problem as positively as we can. Thank you.